Hello, I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault, and you're watching Rights and Wrongs. Our focus this week, how a secret United Nations deal led to the slaughter of thousands of Bosnians. Investigators from the International War Crimes Tribunal examined mass graves around Srebrenica, Bosnia.
As I was walking, I was stepping on bodies. At first, I thought they were alive, and they were trying to hide. I tried to pick someone up to see if I recognized them, if I knew anyone. And then I realized that all their limbs were separate.
About 3,000 Muslims are thought to be buried near Srebrenica. 7,000 more are missing and presumed murdered, the worst case of genocide in Europe since World War II. How did this war crime happen? Who is responsible? Were officials of the United Nations accomplices? In every war, certain events stand out as defining moments. In the former Yugoslavia, one such turning point occurred in the summer of 1995 in a town called Srebrenica. Srebrenica was an enclave loyal to the embattled Bosnian government in Sarajevo, but surrounded by hostile Serbian forces. Its security had been guaranteed by the world community. The United Nations proclaimed Srebrenica a safe haven and put the full force of its prestige and honor behind the protection of its citizens. In this two-part special report, we present the results of an international investigation into what happened at Srebrenica and why. Led by Rights and Wrongs contributor Ilan Ziv and conducted jointly with Reuters Television, Newsday, and the British television program Dispatches, the investigation was based on intercepted Bosnian Serb communications and internal United Nations correspondence. It reveals that high UN officials played central roles in a secret deal that contributed to the death of thousands. Our story begins in the spring of 1993, inside the declared safe haven of Srebrenica.
Srebrenica died a slow death. By the spring of '93, the town was totally encircled by the Bosnian Serb army. They'd captured most of the nearby villages. Now they were tightening their stranglehold on Srebrenica itself. For almost a year, the town was under siege. The Bosnian Serbs had swept across vast areas of Bosnia. In the east, only 3 pockets remained under Muslim government control, and a tidal wave of refugees headed for those last few places of safety. Srebrenica's normal population was 8,000. The flood of refugees meant up to 60,000 people were crammed into the town and starving. The international community sent truckloads of food, but the Bosnian Serbs refused to let the convoys through. Furious at the Serbs' bloody-mindedness, the UN's military commander in Bosnia embarked on a personal crusade.
I have myself the intention to go in Srebrenica in order to see what we can do there.
Driving at night, Morion's small convoy, soldiers and aid workers managed to dodge the Serb lines and reach the besieged town.
All along the road into town, there were dozens, hundreds of women, children, old people, sitting in the snow, burning wooden boxes, trying to find a bit of warmth. It was silent. There was an atmosphere of death, despair. They were desperate at that moment.
The town knew he was their only hope. When he tried to leave, women and children blocked his path. The general climbed onto his vehicle and made the people of Srebrenica a solemn promise. TV pictures that went round the world, words that should now haunt the world. diplomats safely ensconced at the UN in New York aren't used to such decisive statements. But Morillon's very public position embarrassed them into action.
Please raise their hand.
The Security Council declared Srebrenica and 5 other enclaves to be safe areas. They would send in peacekeeping troops to ensure the Serbs respected that. For 2 years, people in Srebrenica trusted the UN's promise. But the Bosnian Serbs used the lull to plan a huge military offensive. Last spring, illegal supplies were coming into Bosnia from Serbia faster than ever. These soldiers are with the Bosnian government army. They're scouts from the 28th Division, which was defending Srebrenica. Their intelligence officer logged repeated violations of the arms embargo as the military build-up intensified.
The transportation of crude oil and armored vehicles was done using the bridges in Sremska Rača, Pavlovića Most near Bijeljina, the bridge near Karakaj, and the one in Zvornik.
He said the Serbs put up temporary pontoon bridges at night across the border, the river Drina, to evade the UN patrols who were supposed to monitor the arms embargo. What worried these scouts most was the arrival of a brigade of Serbian paramilitaries led by the notorious commander Arkan.
On June 21st, from the direction of Belgrade via Šabac, Loznica and Ljubovija, a paramilitary force run by Željko Ražnatović, nicknamed Arkan, crossed into the territory. About 4,000 of them assembled in Bratunac, and they were then sent to different areas around the enclave.
The secret documents dispatchers uncovered confirmed the United Nations knew this too. Arkan's brigade are accused of murder and rape wherever they go. The UN military observers who filed daily briefings on the safe areas realized the chilling significance.
Any attempt to clear an enclave would probably be manpower intensive and require commitment as well as other less salubrious qualities. The Bosnian Serb army soldiers are not showing these qualities, so a unit like the Arkan Brigade would be necessary.
The Bosnian 28th Division also spotted troops from 2 brigades of the Yugoslav National Army, the JNA. That's based in what's still called Yugoslavia, but is now little more than the Republic of Serbia. Their link with the Bosnian Serb army was confirmed to dispatchers by a highly placed NATO officer with the UN in Bosnia, who must remain anonymous.
The Bosnian Serb army couldn't plan an attack like this without the JNA, much less survive without them. The BSA was not only supported by the JNA logistically, but you have to look at their command and control and communications. The Bosnian Serb army communications were all networked with the JNA. They were linked to Belgrade, just like the SAM-6 missiles aimed at our planes.
So how high did cooperation go between Serbia and the Bosnian Serbs? The answer may come from more intercepted phone calls between Bosnian Serb officers talking after the fall of Srebrenica. General Perisic is the JNA's chief of staff, and according to our secret military source, a man who played a key role in planning the attack of Srebrenica, along with the indicted Bosnian Serb general Mladic.
Mladic was spotted with Perisic many times by attachés both US and from other NATO countries. During the last few weeks before the attack on Srebrenica, there was obviously a lot of planning and coordination between the two.
So how much did the men in charge at the UN know of the military build-up? Yasushi Akashi was the UN's special envoy to Yugoslavia.
The information at our disposal was very limited. We did not have access to privileged intelligence reports about the movements of Bosnian Serb troops or movements of Bosnian government troops.
But even if the governments of Britain, France or America were unwilling to share intelligence, the UN's own people were constantly reporting the warning signs to their headquarters in Zagreb.
We passed all this information to Zagreb in May and June. God knows what happened to it. There was a major disconnect between Zagreb and Sarajevo. They had a political agenda and we had a military one.
Information also came from the Bosnian government.
We warned United Nations officials many times that troops of Serbia were coming, that troops are also already there at the border across the river, and so on, so we knew it was going to be attacked.
Did they give you these warnings, and if so, what did you do?
They constantly gave us all kinds of warnings in all kinds of situations. Some were in the nature of false alarms, others turned out to be true, perhaps not always on the exactly the same scale as they had warned us.
But Dispatches has seen the confidential correspondence covering the crucial 2 months before the attack on Srebrenica. There's not one report from Yasushi Akashi relaying those warnings on to the UN. Indeed, when the town fell, headquarters were clearly angry.
How is it that UNPROFOR was taken unawares again by the true extent of Serbian intentions? I find it difficult to accept that no early warning was possible.
The lives of the people of Srebrenica depended on NATO airstrikes, which the UN could call in as a powerful backup to its 450 lightly armed peacekeepers. Yet the man in charge of the UN protection force in Yugoslavia made a deal with the Bosnian Serbs not to employ NATO's F-16 jets. As we shall see, the deal sealed the fate of Srebrenica and its inhabitants.
The defense of the Srebrenica safe area depended on about 450 Dutch soldiers. The UN military commanders wanted a much bigger force, but most governments, including Britain, were unwilling to risk any more of their troops. Bosnian government troops handed over their heavy weapons to the Dutch peacekeepers. The Bosnian Serbs refused. The Dutch themselves were only lightly armed. On their own, they could never stop a full-scale Serb attack.
We were given an impossible mandate. We were given very insufficient resources to do the job. Our forces were very limited. As you know, we had only 450 Dutch troops. They were very courageous, efficient soldiers, but they were terribly outnumbered.
The UN could always call in NATO planes as powerful backup to the small force on the ground. F-16 fighters were based a short flight away in northern Italy. And it's clear from another secret document Dispatches has seen, NATO considered airstrikes the only thing that would deter the Bosnian Serbs.
For more effective support of UN operations, coalition forces must be able and willing to escalate the level of force when previous UN sanctions do not produce the desired results.
That was certainly the view of the British General Rupert Smith. He was the UN's commander in Bosnia, and he believed the only way to make the Serbs listen was to hit them hard. In May last year, he told them to remove heavy weapons from around Sarajevo.
Failure to comply with either deadline will result in the offending party or parties being attacked from the air.
But at UN headquarters in New York, his French boss, General Bernard Janvier, the man in overall charge of UNPROFOR, the UN protection force in Yugoslavia, felt very differently. He expressed those views at a meeting of countries supplying peacekeeping troops.
We have never the means, the structure, or the specific training in combat at our disposal. We have little time ahead of us. We have to limit the risk to our troops.
The UN member governments should give him the resources to do the job properly or pull the peacekeepers out of the safe area.
No more can we play at war.
America's ambassador to the UN, Madeleine Albright, didn't hide her frustration at Janvier's position.
Former Yugoslavia, Bosnia and Croatia. What I think, again, came out of this, and some questions that I myself asked, have to do with the question that we don't understand why air power is not appropriate at this time.
Neither did General Rupert Smith, and the following day he ordered another round of air attacks.
Pripadnici UNPROFOR-a, znači oni vojnici koji su dozvali NATO avione, nalaze se sada u našim rukama i...
The Bosnian Serbs responded by taking hostage 350 UN soldiers, mainly French, and paraded them as human shields against further air attacks. General Smith's strong-arm tactics had backfired in a most humiliating way, and one which would dramatically alter how the UN would act from now on.
For us, liberating our hostages was our highest priority. When you are the official most responsible for safety and the security of all your personnel, of course, getting freedom for all those who are detained or who are in the hostage status had the highest priority for me.
Amongst the secret documents, a letter which proves how this new priority affected UN policy. General Janvier wrote to General Smith, asking him to comply with a request to consult the UN Secretary-General before he authorized any more air attacks. It's diplomatic jargon for saying, in future we'll give the orders, not you. General Janvier now began a series of secret meetings to resolve the hostage crisis his way.
Smith was really straightforward. He said, I won't talk to the Serbs until they release all the hostages unconditionally. Janvier, because of national pressure, since a lot of the hostages were French, was ready and willing to negotiate about the release of the hostages.
At a hotel in Zvornik in Serbia, General Janvier met the Bosnian Serb General Mladic and the Yugoslav Army's Chief of Staff General Perisic, confirming his key role in everything that happened.
Were you aware that he was going to Mali Zvornik for this meeting? Did you authorize it?
Yes.
In advance?
Yes.
Dispatches has seen General Janvier's confidential report of the 5-hour meeting. He admitted to the Bosnian Serbs they had the upper hand.
The airstrikes opened the window, just a crack, and you can profit from this crisis. Don't neglect this chance to regain your credibility in the international community.
General Mladic needed no prompting. His terms were never in doubt.
The hostages will be released immediately in exchange for a promise of no more airstrikes against the Serbs.
A senior French military source confirmed General Janvier had no option and no backing. Without a formal agreement being made, both sides left the table, understanding the position.
I'm not aware of any such deal, and I had utmost confidence in General Janvier, his military judgment, as well as in his personal integrity.
All that remained now was to convince other senior UN figures. 5 days later, they all flew into the Croatian port of Split. Their arrivals were public, their agenda was not.
I have nothing to say at this time. Maybe after the meeting.
Can you tell us why you're here this morning?
It's a routine strategy session between Mr. Akashi and General Smith and General Janvier, the Force Commander.
It was anything but routine. It was to confirm the position over airstrikes and bring General Smith into line with this controversial change in policy. The meeting was held at a military base a few miles outside Split and was secret. What emerges most clearly is the deep division between Generals Smith and Janvier.
We are not able to use air power because we have soldiers on the ground.
Our analysis of the Serbs' intentions is to finish the war this year. They will destroy the eastern enclaves this year.
But the French general stuck to his view. The Serbs wouldn't attack.
The Serbs need international recognition. I don't think they want to go to the extreme.
According to the confidential minutes, General Smith became exasperated. In fact, the atmosphere was so tense, they adjourned to one of Janvier's favourite seafood restaurants. The waitress remembers General Janvier chose the wine, Akashi ordered oysters. But nothing on the menu could sweeten the bitter disagreement that had gone before.
This is a waste of time. The UN should prepare ground rules and declare we are prepared to fight.
I insist we will never use force and impose our will on the Serbs.
Finally, Akashi intervened.
We have to defer to Janvier as the superior commander.
The meeting that ended over the lunch table was enormously significant and kept totally secret.
There was no reason why we should publicize or publicly inform of such meetings or the contents of the meeting.
By the end of that day, an agreement had been reached, which was designed to win the freedom of all the UN soldiers held hostage. But it also sealed the fate of Srebrenica.
In our next edition of Rights and Wrongs, the final act of the tragedy of Srebrenica. Hello, I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault, and you're watching Rights and Wrongs. Our focus this week, why thousands died while under United Nations protection.
If this continues, a massacre is possible. The relationship with the local population is deteriorating, and the UN is losing credibility in Bosnia.
We believed in the international community that if there was a serious threat of the genocide that then happened, they would intervene. I don't know whether the force commander was a fool or badly informed, but he shares the responsibility for the genocide.
In the previous edition of Rights and Wrongs, we presented the first of a two-part special examining the July 1995 massacre of thousands of Muslims in the Bosnian town of Srebrenica. The program was based on an international investigation led by Rights and Wrongs contributor Ilan Ziv and conducted jointly with Reuters Television, Newsday, and the British television program Dispatches. Based on intercepted Bosnian Serb communications and internal United Nations correspondence, the investigation revealed that high UN officials played key roles in a secret deal that led to the worst case of genocide in Europe since World War II. In this program, the final act in the tragedy of Srebrenica and the conclusion of our investigative special, Safe Haven. But first, here's a recap of the story thus far.
Srebrenica died a slow death. By the spring of '93, the town was totally encircled by the Bosnian Serb army. Furious at the Serbs' bloody-mindedness, the UN's military commander in Bosnia embarked on a personal crusade. The general climbed onto his vehicle and made the people of Srebrenica a solemn promise. For 2 years, people in Srebrenica trusted the UN's promise. But the Bosnian Serbs used the lull to plan a huge military offensive.
We warned United Nations officials many times that troops from Serbia were coming, that troops are also already there at the border across the river, and so on, so we knew it was going to be attacked.
Did they give you these warnings, and if so, what did you do about it?
They constantly gave us all kinds of warnings in all kinds of situations.
British General Rupert Smith, the UN's commander in Bosnia. He believed the only way to make the Serbs listen was to hit them hard.
Failure to comply with either deadline will result in the offending party or parties being attacked from the air.
The Bosnian Serbs responded by taking hostage 350 UN soldiers and paraded them as human shields against further air attacks.
For us, liberating our hostages was our highest priority.
General Janvier, the man in overall charge of UNPROFOR, the UN protection force in Yugoslavia, now began a series of secret meetings to resolve the hostage crisis his way.
Can you tell us why you're here this morning?
It's a routine strategy session between Mr. Akashi and General Smith and General Janvier, the force commander.
It was anything but routine. It was to confirm the position over airstrikes and bring General Smith into line with this controversial change in policy. By the end of that day, an agreement had been reached, which was designed to win the freedom of all the UN soldiers held hostage. But it also sealed the fate of Srebrenica.
As we shall see, top United Nations military aides predicted the Serb attack on Srebrenica months before it occurred, and advised that the only defense was NATO air power. But French General Bernard Janvier, the supreme UN military commander in the former Yugoslavia, decided to halt NATO air attacks in exchange for the release of UN peacekeepers held hostage by the Bosnian Serbs. Here now the conclusion of Safe Haven.
The final act was beginning in the tragedy of Srebrenica. On July the 6th last year, the Bosnian Serbs began their long-planned offensive. The Bosnian Muslim commander begged the UN for air attacks to stop the Serb guns pounding the town. Among the secret United Nations documents uncovered by dispatches, a remarkably similar plea from their own military observers under attack with the rest of the town's people.
If this continues, a massacre is possible. The relationship with the local population is deteriorating, and the UN is losing credibility in Bosnia.
We believed in the international community that if there was a serious threat of the genocide that then happened, they would intervene, because they took on the responsibility handed to them by the Security Council to protect the area.
There was a detailed procedure, Blue Sword, to launch an air attack to support UN troops under threat. The Dutch commander, Lieutenant Colonel Karremans, stranded in Srebrenica, had already put in 3 requests, this one the night of the 9th. 3 times he was told no.
As far as Lieutenant Colonel Karremans' request for close air support goes, Zagreb reacted like this. Before we use the ultimate weapon, we should react first with a lower level of force.
But at UN headquarters in Zagreb, by the fifth night of the Serb attack, they'd changed their minds. All of Janvier's aides now agreed it was time to call in NATO air power. Planes were ordered to take off at dawn to be ready if the situation flared up again. And the Bosnian Serbs were given an ultimatum: stop shelling by 6 a.m. or be attacked. That news was passed to the commander of the Dutch battalion in Srebrenica. In the early hours of the morning, he relayed it to the town's leaders, even telling them where the targets would be.
The area he had marked on the map, he called it a death zone. I personally asked Karamans, as a human being and not as a commander, if he can promise that the attack will come. He told me he promised me as a commander and as a human being.
Did you believe Karamans was telling the truth?
Yes, at that moment we believed him, because he spelled out the entire plan for the attack and spelled out and emphasized the political agreement of the governments involved.
Karamans also advised Commander Ramiz to move everyone out of the area, which he did. Ramiz then went outside to reassure the refugees.
I was in front of the post office when the commander came and said they were going to protect us. I was not alone. There were thousands of us. It was night. Around midnight we asked what was going to happen, and they promised to protect us.
The secret operational log sheet confirms fighter planes were in the air and ready to hit targets from 6:50 a.m. onwards. F-16s circled for hours without General Janvier issuing the order to strike. They landed again mid-morning when their fuel ran out. In Srebrenica, soldiers and civilians waited, watching the empty sky. On July the 11th, the day the expected air attacks never came, the UN safe area of Srebrenica finally fell to the Bosnian Serbs. The tanks that rolled in found a deserted town. Thousands of refugees had already fled to a UN base, surely the one place they'd still be safe. The UN military observers who watched are no longer dispassionate in their reporting.
Tears were in our eyes, seeing the desperate displaced persons with no secure future, looking at us, seeking help we cannot give them. We really lost this enclave and our heads.
Even now, General Mladic was dictating terms. The Serbs would provide the buses to move the refugees and not the UN. And once again, the UN gave in.
We knew if they were going to be taken by buses, they will kill them. We know what Serbs did before. Wherever they captured people, they either detained or killed all male from 18 to 55. It has never happened that a man of that age arrived across the front line.
His fears were clearly spelled out at a meeting with UN staff, who reported his words onto Yasushi Akashi.
It would be a disaster. The UN should protect them in the area where they are. It's supposed to be a protected area.
His worst fears of what would happen were confirmed by this video. A Serb cameraman unwittingly filmed the men being separated from the women and children.
We never had any doubts about what will happen after the men and women were separated, in particular in Srebrenica, where the cruelty was going to be worse, because Mladic wanted to avenge the Bosnian offensive of 1992. Only a fool would not have expected it, or someone who's extremely badly informed. I don't know whether the force commander was a fool or badly informed, but he shares the responsibility for the genocide.
Deserted by the UN, a column of exhausted soldiers and civilians made one last attempt to escape in the hours before Srebrenica fell. They walked straight into an ambush. Dispatches has seen an intercepted signal from the Bosnian Serbs. They called for a bulldozer with a shovel so that those who surrendered could be killed and buried. For miles around, it became one huge killing field.
We hear some shooting from the area of Bratunac. Because the men were taken in separate buses, we fear for the worst.
But Yasushi Akashi, in his daily report, leaves any mention until page 2, paragraph 8.
We are beginning to detect a shortfall in the number of people expected to arrive in Tuzla.
UN headquarters sent him a sharp note. What about the reports of mass murder coming from refugees?
They're widespread and consistent, and have been given credence by a variety of international observers. We have, however, received nothing on the subject from UNPROFOR.
So did the UN's Special Envoy underreport the dangers?
I cannot say whether we did so or not. But as I said, in hindsight, it might have been so.
3,000 Muslims are dead. Up to 7,000 more are still missing. Those who anxiously scan the boards know there's very little chance they'll ever see husbands and fathers again. General Janvier refused to speak to dispatches, despite repeated requests. Yasushi Akashi was promoted. He certainly never considered resigning.
No, I felt that it was my duty to do my best, in carrying out my job under the difficult circumstances. So long as I had the confidence of UN Secretary General, I felt that I should continue. Abdication of my responsibility would have been an act of irresponsibility.
Srebrenica is now under Serb control. The United Nations failed in its promise to protect the town, but the UN is only the voice of its member states, and all the evidence is that Western governments lacked the political will. They were prepared to sacrifice Srebrenica and its people.
It took a total of 72 hours for the Bosnian Serbs to uproot, round up, arrest, expel, and possibly kill the entire Bosnian population of Srebrenica.
A week after the town fell, an American major with the UN filed his report. He was brutally succinct.
A deliberate and planned execution of an ethnic cleansing operation, which UNPROFOR and the community of nations have watched with little or no response.
The massacre in Srebrenica raises key human rights questions. First and foremost, what role, if any, should morality play in the formulation and execution of international policy? I discussed these issues recently with Robert Gallucci, Dean of the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and until recently the top U.S. State Department official in the Balkan peace process. Also joining us, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Roy Gutman of Newsday, one of the key figures in the Safe Haven investigation. Bob Gallucci, let me start with you. Does morality ever enter into the equation in these situations?
In my 21 years of government experience, I'd say morality always enters into the calculation. But it is not always, I don't want to say rarely, but it certainly is not always prescriptive. It does not dispose of the issue. There's long-term, there's short-term. There's a calculation about what will work and what risks are reasonable to take. All these infect the moral judgment and make it a very difficult one often to make.
You know, we risked hundreds of lives, certainly dozens, to rescue one pilot who was shot down in Bosnian Serb-held territory. Now we hear from the leaders of NATO on the ground that it is not worth risking the life of one American boy to capture Karadzic and Mladic. I mean, they're making a moral calculation, and in fact a political calculation, that it seems to me the President of the United States himself has to make. It has to be made, and we have to hold the politicians accountable for that.
Indeed. I mean, I'm certainly all in favor of holding those we elect and make those kinds of decisions accountable. My only observation here is that it is not a simple choice.
But let's look at Dayton, where the President Slobodan Milosevic was very much involved in bringing together all of the forces on the Serb side to the peace table. Roy Gutman, let me ask you about Milosevic and what your reporting showed about his complicity with Mladic and Karadzic. I mean, did it show that a deal was made with Milosevic, or what?
I think there's been a trend and a pattern of the U.S. government, which is that we know pretty well that Milosevic has played this role, the godfather's role, the supporting role throughout the war in Bosnia, but we have been reluctant to blame him because it would mean we can't really sit down and write a deal with him. Don't forget, a month or two before Dayton, the Croats and the Bosnian army were on an offensive and practically took all of northern Bosnia. They were stopped by the United States in order to have the Dayton conference. So yes, to have this particular outcome of a 50-50 division of Bosnia, I suppose you had to have Milosevic on board. That was a political judgment by the administration. So in that sense, yes, they did make a deal to look the other way for everything Milosevic had done.
Do you accept that you made a deal to look the other way?
I know of no explicit deal that relieves Milosevic of any responsibility for anything he may have done through the course of that war or for the war happening in the first place. If the War Crimes Tribunal were tomorrow morning to indict Milosevic, I don't know that anybody would say there was a violation of any deal. I know of no agreement with anybody that he would not be indicted, and I have no reason to believe that at some point he might not be.
Well, we can't resolve this one, but let's move on to our next area. Roy Gutman, in your reporting, what did you turn up about intelligence?
Well, Mladic, the Bosnian Serb general, told the UN officials in Sarajevo, like General Smith, that he really had to go for the enclaves, the eastern little islands of population, like Srebrenica, because they were taking up too many soldiers and too many resources. And he said that he indicated that he had to do it in 1995. So there was a lot of expectation within the UN that this would happen. I think the U.S. government had some indications, some specific indications as well. And that is where the intelligence, I guess, failure or lapse occurred. Because the U.S. side, up until the day Srebrenica fell, was unsure about the goals of the Bosnian Serbs and the Yugoslavs. The Bosnian army had certainly made up its mind. The UN, Mr. Akashi and General Janvier acted as if Srebrenica would last forever. So, yes, intelligence really was lacking.
Does that surprise you, Bob Gallucci?
The collection of intelligence, getting it to the right people, having them understand what they're seeing, it's a reasonably complicated task in the government, and one doesn't have to have a conspiracy theory of any kind to explain why one does not immediately understand the full significance of things, especially when, as was just noted, things are happening pretty quickly.
Roy Gutman, you broke the story of the evidence of death camps in Bosnia in 1992, and you and others tried to bring this to the attention of the U.S. government and its allies, and they ignored you.
Well, in 1992, the intelligence community was picking up a tremendous amount of information that indicated all sorts of atrocities were going on in Bosnia, and they said subsequently that there was no question about the essence of what was going on, but they didn't focus on concentration camps until my story appeared. I mean, that's understandable in a way. It's a new phenomenon. I'd like to think that with all of their capabilities, they'd be ahead of any of us in the press, but maybe, in fact, we do tip them off to trends that they don't always see. I think that holds for 1992, and I can understand that to some degree then. I can't understand it in 1995. You know, it was nearly a month before the U.S. government came to a realization and started making an international uproar about the massacres in Srebrenica. I don't see why they weren't doing the obvious, which is to follow up on a conquest by tuning in to the radio transmitters, by asking the Bosnians, by just collecting everything they could so that we weren't taken by surprise once again.
Are there lessons from this that can be drawn?
The international community, the United States, the Europeans, and others were looking at the difficult case of Bosnia and not seeing an easy way to intervene. The burden was put on the United Nations, which was utterly incapable of stabilizing that situation and preventing atrocities from happening.
Yeah, but the point is that human rights atrocity is not just a violation of human rights. It has a tremendous political impact in the country and eventually outside of the country where it happens. And leaders such as our president or the Western leaders in general should have the information in as real time as possible so that they can decide whether this is the time to intervene or they can use it for other reasons. I'm not saying that we intervene simply because of an atrocity, but this does give, in fact, the occasion for political decisions. And I think those moments were missed again and again and again throughout this whole tragedy.
Well, Bob Gallucci and Roy Gutman, thank you.
Thank you.